Gaby's, among other things, an immigrants' rights leader in this country. In 2010, with 3 other undocumented students, she led the Trail of Dreams, a 4-month walk from Miami to Washington, D.C. And she came through South Carolina, actually, on her way. And last night at dinner, in fact, was recounting some stories of her memory of walking through South Carolina. In 2012, as a political director for United We Dream, she spearheaded the efforts that led to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. In 2013, Gaby became the first undocumented Latina to testify in front of Congress, speaking to the Senate Judiciary Committee about the urgent need for immigration reform. Gaby was named one of Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 and was profiled in Elle magazine in a feature production on the world's most accomplished 30-year-old women. Gaby's the program director of the nation's largest college success and scholarship fund, the Dream.us, and we're just really glad that you're here to talk with us tonight. Let's welcome Gaby Pacheco.
Hello. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you, especially because, like Ben said, about 9 years ago, right around this time, we were entering South Carolina. I'm glad that this time I came on a flight to not join you walking here. And I've been doing a lot more flying, less walking. But it was an incredible journey that really made me fall in love with the state. And I was telling them yesterday as we were having dinner that I really look forward to retiring in South Carolina. So that's just a thing. But before we start, I wanted to get us a little acquainted, and I wanted to know a little bit more about you. And I had just a few questions, and I wanted to know how many of you were born in Columbia, South Carolina. Okay, so we have some natives here. How about South Carolina? Okay, a little bit more hands. How about other states? Oh, you immigrants! And how about people from outside of the United States, born in other places? Okay, you expats. We have all these different names for immigrants. All right. So how many of you would consider, or have considered, or have moved because of a job, because you fell in love, or because you moved because you wanted to be in a better neighborhood? All right, so again, all of you immigrants. So I wanted to start with those questions because I wanted to create a context. Right? The fact that as long as there's been human beings on Earth, there's been migration. And migration happens for all kinds of reasons. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why my family migrated to the United States and why I'm here today. But it's for the same factors and the same reasons why probably all of you are here today, or why your families came to live to South Carolina. Right? And so migrations have happened throughout history for many different reasons. Some people have been pushed to migrate, some people have been forced to migrate, and some people have migrated under their own decision because they're seeking their own better future in life. Several years ago, actually over a decade ago, Harvard did a study, and it showed that people actually are very scared to move. And it's usually the most courageous ones that decide to uproot themselves, leave everything behind. Some of them leaving their language, their food, their culture, their family, to seek better opportunities. So to all you immigrants in this room, thank you for being courageous. All right, so this just came out, and my friend Alex, who works at the Cato Institute, is a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. They're more libertarian, but they're really focused on immigration. Their focus is more on the economics. But they did this really great, concise comic strip that talks about the history of immigration. And in order to understand any topic, right? When we are, for example, working with the child and trying to understand why the child is acting up, we have to go back, right? We have to see what the history, what's leading to that. And any issue, right? When you go to the doctor and you tell them, you know, I've been having headaches, the doctor starts asking you all these different questions, the history, right? Have you been sleeping? What have you been eating? What have you been doing, right? The history of things in order to understand why things are happening. So I really felt that when I saw this, I said, oh, this is perfect, because I really want to give you a context of the history of immigration or immigration laws in the United States for us to then have a discussion and conversation around it. There are a couple of things here and the way that Alex talks about immigrants and in particular immigrants that are in the country here unauthorized, that I will make a note because I feel it's really important, and how we call people or name people or label people. But aside from that, I really love this comic strip. So the history of immigration, right, or immigration policy in our country starts around 1790. And there was an act that happened then, and it created zero restriction on immigration. But what it did do is say that only certain people could naturalize in the United States to become citizens. And those were free white people of good character, right? But no restriction of who can come, right? So if you do not fit that category, you cannot be considered a citizen, okay? So back in the day, during that time, there was other significant laws that at the state level, that restricted who can come into those states, and it was more about sick immigrants, right? And rare cases to disincentivize, you know, indigenous immigrants from landing, and some states even sent immigrants back to Europe. But on the whole, these laws were not strictly enforced, right? If you were able to migrate and make it to the United States, you were good to go. Modern history of immigration restriction really starts in 1875 with the Page Act, which excluded criminals and Chinese women traveling alone, okay? We can probably try to go back and try to figure out why Chinese women traveling alone, or we can make some educated guess why that happened. It was followed quickly by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the Immigration Act of 1917, the Emergency Quota of 1921, and the National Origins Act of 1924. So here are some of these. And 1882 barred all Chinese immigrants. 1917 barred illiterate immigrants, mostly Africans, and most people from the rest of Asia. 1921 and 1924, first hard numerical restrictions on European immigrants. So really in 1924, and a lot of historians and people that talk about immigration usually start their history of immigration restriction laws with the 1924 Act, which was a culmination of half a century of restrictions. It virtually barred all Asians and Africans while placing severe numerical limits on Southern and Eastern Europeans, so Chinese, people from Liberia, Italy, and Russia. At the same time, it favored immigrants from Western Europe, Northern Europe, and Western Hemisphere. And Mexico's in there. France and England too. So it contained no system to allow refugees or asylees, which it's a key point to make at that moment, but this would result in devastating consequences for Jews and other refugees, especially as they were fleeing Nazi Germany, fascism, communism in the 1930s from Europe and Asia. And we've heard of the famous case of that boat that was coming in with Jewish immigrants, that they said no, Canada said no, they were sent back, and they all perished and died. And so the 1924 Act's rules may strike today all of us as grossly unjust and controversial, but during that time, there was no opposition to it. Okay, so I just want people to like sit on that. Back in the day, people fleeing persecution, fleeing death, people were all right with sending those boats back. That was okay. So in 1924, when the act passed, Congress with a veto-proof majority, and the President Calvin Coolidge enthusiastically signed it into law. This is a little joke that they have there, which too funny, but you know, no more pizzas or hard-to-pronounce deli meats. A group as diverse as labor unions, eugenics, progressives, social reformers, American nationalists, and for the first time, some American businesses were supporters. And the median voter positively responded to President Coolidge's argument that Congress should severely restrict immigration because America must be kept American. Sounds familiar? Goes around, comes around. So the pendulum began to swing back and the demand for labor increased. So during the Second World War, a lot of our men were going to war and we needed the hands. Thus, the bracero program. Bracero, in Spanish, it's word for brazos, for hands. And so they created this program, which mainly allowed low-skilled Mexicans to come in the agricultural workers. So they started bringing in hundreds of thousands of people from Mexico to come work in the United States and come work the fields under this program. And since China was a wartime ally, the United States removed the insulting anti-Chinese immigrant laws, allowing 105 Chinese immigrants per year to start coming in. Again, because they needed their railroads, they needed to fill in those seats of the American men who were at war. And in 1948, with an eye towards the difficult condition in post-war Europe, Congress passed the Displaced Person Act, creating a system for refugees and asylees. So this was the first time we saw the United States recognize displaced people and try to do something about it. And in 1952, Congress removed most of the race and ethnicity-based portions of the immigration law, and then came one of the most important acts of Congress that most people have heard of, which is the Immigration Act of 1965, which removed restrictions on Africans, Asians, and European immigrants, while for the first time limiting immigrants from the Western Hemisphere. Bye-bye Mexico. Opponents of the 1965 Act amended it to expand chain migration, making it much easier for relatives of US citizens to come here. And I want to pause there and talk to you a little bit about chain migration, quote unquote, and it's on quote unquote, because it really is family-based migration. It is, I think, a human right for moms to be with children, children to be with dads, and for family units to stay together. I think that's a core value that we have as human beings. That's a core value we have as Americans, right? We value family. The topic of chain migration is something that we've heard a lot, at least this year, not as much as last year. They figured that chain migration would keep immigrant flow largely European. So back in the day, there was a favor, right? People were okay with that. And since most Americans were of European descent, they thought, okay, we're just gonna keep America American. But surprise, the number of family-based immigrants from Asia, Africa, and Latin America grew much more rapidly than the number of European immigrants, okay? And the numerical caps on people from Western Hemisphere, the cancellation of the Bracero program, which doesn't go into detail here, but practically what happened was when they no longer needed the support and help of those workers, they started deporting them. And it didn't matter that they had roots in the country, it didn't matter they had children that were born here. They said, we don't need you anymore, we don't want you in the country, fine. So the American economy resulted in a large black market for labor from Mexico and Central America. So there's this saying that I've heard, a friend of mine, he uses, and it says that Americans are addicted to cheap labor. And reality is that when we were walking through North Carolina during the Trail of Dreams, we went through a community that was very divided. The African American community was extremely upset against the Latino community, the rapidly growing Latino community, because they were displacing them of their jobs in the chicken farms and in the factories that they used to be the ones that got employed. And it was really interesting to sit down and talk to the people there and hear them out. And they would say, look, this were our jobs, and now we don't have jobs. They took our jobs. But when we would listen and hear the people who were the Latinos, mostly indigenous Guatemalans, they would say, look, they lured us here. They told us that we would get jobs. And when we got here, they practically put us to work 12 to 14 hours a day. We are getting paid below minimum wage. And we feel, right, that even with this little bit of money that we get, we're not just feeding ourselves here, but we're also feeding our families back home. So at the end of the day, right, the system, the greater system, right, created a sense, right, this black market for labor that not only put in these communities, this Guatemalan community, at risk, right, of being exploited, but also displaced the African Americans who had those jobs and no longer had those opportunities there. And what I think it's really interesting in this is that people, instead of looking at the greater system, right, the problematic of the system, they're looking at other people, right, as the problem. So various amnesties, most famously the one in 1986, legalized many of these, and this is where I'm like, oh, illegal immigrants, that's where it says there. So illegal, first of all, is not a noun, but also it has become a very derogatory term that gets used, a term to call people. And usually, you know, I'll hear somebody say illegal immigrant, and I'm like, okay, you know, as long as they're not necessarily using it with bad terms. But I know that there are people, immigrants, that hear that word, and it hurts, that word. So I'm going to give you some other options. Other than illegal, some people use the word undocumented. And then also the legal correct term, it really is unauthorized, because they're not authorized to be in the United States. Okay. So this gave the ability to sponsor family members, thus again accelerating the legal immigration. So in 1990, Congress liberalized immigration for skilled workers. So they created a more robust H-1B program to be able to get more skilled workers, doctors, engineers, people with PhDs, etc. But not for lower skilled workers. And since then, most immigration laws have been designed to boost border security and respond to a growing number of immigrants. And Congress has debated numbers of comprehensive immigration reforms that would simultaneously legalize immigration or undocumented immigrants and increase legal immigration, expand immigration law enforcement, but so far none of these proposals have become law. So the comprehensive immigration reform movement and what we have seen in all the bills, the 2013 legislation that passed the Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham was one of the people that were behind that and worked really hard to put that forward. After the bill passed, a couple of us, myself and a couple of friends sat down and worked through the point system. This was the new system that they wanted to create to allow immigrants to come into the nation. And not one of our parents, not a single one of our parents would have gotten enough points in order to legally migrate to the United States. The reason is that most immigrants that are coming to the nation are coming to the nation with certain skills. They don't have the resources, the money, they don't have the level of education that these point systems usually need. And so at the end of the day, right, these proposals that they're putting forward go against, right, what it really is needed, right, as far as immigrants in the country. So in the old days, Ellis Island was sometimes called the Island of Tears, and it was because at the time about 2% of arrivals were sent home after failing to pass the test of health and criminality. And today the numbers are practically reversed. Of all the millions of people who would like to come, only a small fraction make it each year, and they go through a much more involved process than the one many of our ancestors experienced. So this is what Alex, thinks, that his personal view is that most people who wish to come here should be able to enter legally, so long as they aren't a threat to public health or safety. But in the history of this country, the doors have swung from wide open to virtually closed as public perception of immigrants. We are at a strange moment in history where immigration is simultaneously more controversial and more popular than it has ever been in a long time. So a question that he poses, does that mean that laws will become more open, more closed, or just different? That's all up to all of you to think about and decide. So before I tell you a little bit about myself, I want to break down that information. So immigration has always been something that more and more is to serve the needs of the country. And when I say serve the needs of the country, I'm not talking about us. I'm not talking about the people. I'm not talking about communities. I'm talking about the money, the dollars, right? And so unfortunately, when we start putting dollar signs on human beings and we take away their humanity, right? We start to create laws that go against the humanity of people. And at the end of the day, that put, again, people against people. So I think it's really key and important that we recognize that, right? And that we see that no matter where we fall, right? If we are against people coming to the country, or if we are against some sort of legalization, the fact and the reality is that immigrants are here. Immigrants have been needed. Immigrants will always be needed, right? The way that communities, the way that economies work is by people. And there are just so many people that we can create. Millennials today are not having children. And so who are the people that are going to come right after millennials to be able to serve the needs of the older generation? That's a question that we have to ask ourselves, right? And a lot of the times, the answer is immigrants, right? But what is the cost to the immigrant? What is the cost to the community to have immigrants come into our nation and not have full rights, not have the ability to legalize themselves, not have the ability to be 100% part of our communities? So as I shared with you, I came to the United States with my family when I was 8 years old. My family used to frequent the United States, so they were kind of middle class. We're from Ecuador. And my parents loved coming to the United States. They had family that had already moved here from the 80s and the 70s. And so they loved business, and that was their thing. So they would go to Chile and buy wine and sell wine in Ecuador. They would come to the United States and buy clothes and products and go back and sell them. And so on one trip, my dad witnessed a group of elementary school children walking alone by themselves from their house to the school. And he was just mesmerized. And he told my mom, I want that for my children. I want that level of safety that I know that those parents know that those children are going to be fine and they're going to be okay. So that was kind of planted in his mind. And things were starting to go bad for them and their business. People came in, stole large sums of money from their office. Things were just not going well. And my dad one day said, I have this vision. God gave me this vision. And he said, that we would be much better off if we moved to the United States. This would be better for our children. This would be better for our safety. Let's go try to make the U.S. our home. So they started selling our things. I remember when they sold my bicycle. I was really sad that day. And I really didn't understand what was happening because we had just recently moved to a house that my mom had worked so hard to build, and I remember going every weekend to see how it was getting built, and she was deciding what the kitchen cabinet was going to look like, and who loves remodeling? I don't think nobody likes remodeling. I don't like remodeling. The final product, right, of remodeling, yes, we do all love that. And I remember my mom crying and saying to my dad, how she was scared, how she didn't want to leave. how she was going to leave her family behind, and my dad just reassuring her that everything was going to be okay, and that they needed to do this for their children. So we moved to the United States, and I remember Miami, and one of the things, my biggest memory was that everything seemed crisper. It was as if, you know, how many of you have ever done, for those that wear glasses, right? When you put on your glasses, everything just looks so much crisper. And that's the way it looked for me. The green looked greener, the lights at the stops, the green, the yellow, red were different, like it was just brighter. And I didn't quite understand that we had moved to another country, because when I was a kid and I would play with a globe, I would see this line, right, that goes around the world, and it's called the equator. So I thought Ecuador was the whole entire world. So when I moved, I was like, oh, I'm just going to another city in this country called Ecuador. Okay. And as I started kind of realizing this, I did set into panic and realized I couldn't see my grandparents anymore. I started realizing I didn't have my cousins, and I wouldn't go to parties, and Christmases with the family weren't the same. But I acclimated quickly, and I started loving school. And today I shared my story of how I came to love the concept of college. And it's a little weird, but I had been chosen to participate in this festival. And I was still in ESL language classes, and it was a little scary. But they said, you know, just go with the mom of another kid, and every day, you know, you get dropped off at this big place called the University of Miami. And the first day we got to the campus, they kind of give us a tour, and then they said, during lunch, you're going to have to just go this way, you're going to make a left, and then as you walk towards it, you'll see the cafeteria. And we're like, okay. So here was a group of 30 to maybe 60 elementary school kids walking to the cafeteria. And as soon as we walk in, these sliding doors open, and we all go, whoa! Because we saw McDonald's and Burger King and Taco Bell and Panda Express, and we were like, and I thought to myself, I want to go to college. I want to have the choice of all these amazing foods. So that's how I fell in love with the concept of college and university. Sad, but my golden cafeteria was awaiting for me. And when I was in 8th grade, my sisters, or my oldest sister, came home crying after my mom had taken her to the local community college because she wanted to enroll as a nurse. And she came running into the house, went into her bed, and I kept on asking, like, what happened, what's going on? And they said, well, they told her that she can't go to school because she doesn't have the right kind of papers. And that's when it set in that that was going to happen to her, so I started with my plan B. Plan B is I'm going to join the military. So my second older sister was part of the ROTC program, Daughters of America. She was just an all-American girl. And we had recruiters come to our house, and they sat down, and they were really excited to recruit her, and they said, oh, you don't have the right kind of papers, so you can't join the military. And I'm like, oh no, plan B out the door. So something set in me, and I thought I can either give up, or I can either work really, really hard to prove to everyone that I deserve a chance, that I belong here, and I should be given an opportunity to go to college. So I became one of those students, those annoying students that was a teacher's pet, that was in cross country, basketball, track and field. I took classes in the night because I thought that I just wanted to absorb and get as much education. I thought that taking AP courses was going to give me the college experience. Right? I was 17. What does a 17-year-old know about college? Especially when nobody in her family had gone to college. And so when I sat down with my college counselor, which was a nerve-wracking experience, because they call you down and they go down the alphabet, so I was P, I was pretty towards the end. And they called me down, and I sat down with my counselor, and I told her I really want to go to college, and she said, look, You can't go to school, you can't go to college. Don't dare to apply anywhere because you're gonna get yourself and your family in trouble. Just resign yourself with the idea that you're gonna go to college. Just go to work. And I sat there, I was really angry, but I told myself, I'm gonna prove you wrong. So I worked really hard and I got into college, and it was one of the most defining moments of my life because I realized that I worked really, really hard. That summer, there was a family that had promised that they were gonna help me go to school, and they asked me to come up with them to North Carolina. And I said, sure, I'll come up with you. I had been teaching their children how to play the cello and the violin and viola, and I was their tutor. And so I said, this would be perfect. I'm gonna get paid for the lessons that I'm gonna continue to do. I'm gonna get paid for the time that I'm gonna be there. And they said, we're just gonna be there a week. And so I said, can my sister come with me? And it'd be great, and we can help out around the house. And they said, sure. So we all drove up together to North Carolina. And along the way, the treatment that we were getting from this family, which was at the beginning, just lovely, and I thought they really cared about us, started to become more of, you are our servant. And so the days passed in North Carolina, and they started requesting us to paint the house, paint the deck, clean this, do that. And I thought, okay, I just have to do this because I really want to go to college and they're going to help me. And 2 weeks passes by, and I'm like, and when are we going to go home? Because I really want to go home. And we were not allowed to go anywhere. We were practically stuck there. The only place we can go was to church on Sundays. So about 3 weeks into this ordeal, I confronted the lady and I said, look, I'm 18 years old. I don't know what you're doing to me. I don't know why you're doing this to us, but you need to take me back home. And so we went back home, and I thought, all right, whatever, this was a terrible experience, but at least I'm gonna get the help that I need and the jumpstart money that I need in order to pay for school. And we did not get that money. And so when I got my first college schedule, some of you college students are here, you're like, oh, you saw the bill, or you saw how terrible these classes were. My class schedule was pretty terrible. I had like a 7 in the morning class and one that would end like at 10 at night. And I remember I started crying, and the counselor was like, don't worry, this is how the first semester is. Next semester you'll have a better schedule. And I started laughing. I was like, I'm not crying because of the schedule. I'm crying because I'm privileged enough to be here. Because my sisters couldn't be here. Because I had friends that wanted to go to college, couldn't be here. And so that's where really my activism and advocacy started. And it wasn't around immigration. It wasn't around even access to higher education. It was around trying to be recognized as a human being, trying to prove to the world that I was worthy enough to be given the chance to be able to go and accomplish my dream. So that's where, continued and did the walk and helped convince President Obama that the right thing to do was do the DACA program. And I've been doing this work with the Dream.us, which is the largest scholarship program in the nation. We've given 4,000 scholarships to undocumented students across the nation. We've raised over $200 million. And today we got word that we're going to get a little bit more push. And that's because one of our donors heard that there are students here in South Carolina, high school students who are 10th graders who want to go to college but are afraid of what their life is going to be like once they graduate high school, because South Carolina restricts these students from being able to go to college. So I want to play a little game with you, and I just want to do the who are they. So I will show you an image, and you can shout out the name of the immigrant you see on the screen. That was easy, right? We're our computer science majors, none here. So, did somebody say Google? Yeah? Yes. So this is Sergey, who started Google. Who's this immigrant? Anybody know? Anybody know? Yes, Nikki, from the former governor of South Carolina. Who are they? Who are these immigrants? Parents, I heard parents. Ivanka parents, yes. No, Melania, sorry. Melania Trump. That would be weird. This is Melania Trump's parents. Okay. And who are they? Yes, so these are DACA students. Yes. So they are no different than they are, than she is, than he is, than he is. Every single one of these happy, smiling people are people. So, how do we move the issue forward? I think the most important thing is to challenge the status quo. If one person would have challenged and said, why are we not letting that vote in? We would have saved hundreds of Jewish lives. If we don't ask questions, right, why is it that we have undocumented people in the country? Right? One of my favorite questions that people ask is, why don't you just become legal? Actually, Trump asked that question to me. So I met with him in 2013, and he said, you know, like, I have the best attorneys. You know, I can help you. Like, why? I'm like, you don't think I've talked to attorneys? I don't think people want to get legal. The biggest sign that people want to get legal is called DACA, the Deferred Action for Child Arrivals Program. When it was announced in June 15, 2012, the people were told you would be able to start applying in August. August 15 was a Wednesday. That Saturday, there were lines, thousands of people waiting in line to get help from attorneys who were willing to help these young people file these. 800,000 people filed, came up with the money, gave all their information to the government. So when I had to file, I had to tell them every single address I ever lived in. I had to prove to them through my records, everything, that I had been in the country since 2007. And I had to go in and do my biometrics, which is they get all your fingerprints, they make sure they run an FBI check and everything else on you to make sure that you can fit the criteria that they want. So people want to get legal. But ask questions, why? Why are these things happening? Why are we resolving this? Talk about the issue. So a lot of the times people, you know, try to shy away from the issue and try to shy away from talking to people who are quote unquote anti-immigrant. I think that in the hearts of hearts, a majority of the people that are labeled anti-immigrant, they're not necessarily anti-immigrant. They're just, they don't have the right information. There's a very small amount of people that are actually anti-immigrant, and I've talked to them. And I've clearly seen, you know, they'll talk about purity. They'll talk about taking they'll tell you, you know, they're not white enough. Right? But majority of people will tell you things like, well, they're taking jobs away, or they're here because, you know, they're criminals, right? And you can talk to them and dispel these myths. But more than anything, talking about the issue makes it less controversial. And sometimes when we have controversial issues, by not talking about it, right, it makes things worse. And it makes things be so polarized, right? One side is one way, the other side is the other way. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, like, we're all human beings. And we can all have our opinions, but, you know, if we talk about it, we can find commonalities in a lot of things. I think it's really important to meet people who are affected by the issue. So today, Representative Collins, who is a Republican, and one of the things that I loved that he said today was he said that he is the most conservative Republican that lives in the most conservative district, in the most conservative state. But that he is doing this because this is the right thing to do. Right? This is legislation. And he said that what convinced him that this is what he needed to do was that he met one DACA student, he heard their story, and then he asked to put a hearing together so that one DACA student could share their story and 30 came forward and shared their story. And that man is on fire. I have not seen a politician across the country who is trying to move an issue more forward than him. So if you know him, if you can send him a quick thank you, please do. But yeah, try to meet people, who are affected by this issue, talk to them, and push for something to be done. It's unacceptable that we talk about this issue. We've been talking about the DREAM Act since 2001. It just, we are allowing for the status quo to continue. And fine, if you want to create restrictive laws, do something about it, right? But this idea that politicians have that they talk and talk and policymakers talk and don't do anything about it is not getting us anywhere. And why I tell you fine, do restrictive laws is because I know they're not going to work. And I know that the country's always going to need immigrants, and there's going to be a day where they're going to have to realize that, and they're going to, as we saw in the brief history of immigration, they're going to have to overturn some of those policies and laws. So now I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions, and I hope that was helpful. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
So, I know you said that your sister couldn't go to college, but you were able to go to college. What changed? Was it, did you have the right paperwork, as you said? Or
No.
Like, what thing changed for you to go choosing?
I was really annoying. And I didn't take no for an answer. And so I met this incredible woman, Sue Georgie, at a college fair, and she said, oh my gosh, I've never seen somebody so fired up about going to college. I don't really know what to do, but we'll start talking to people. And she literally was taking me from office to office, financial aid, admissions, international students, trying to figure out who can help me. And once I saw there was a little crack in the door, I would be there. And so I don't know why, but my boss says, on the 26th visit, I don't know if it was the 26th visit, but it was many visits. I would be there at 6 in the morning because I wanted to be the first student. I would make the line to wait for the person to come in at 7 in the morning. And I would bring in all this stuff. And I practically gathered and put a packet together of just certificates and letters of recommendation and my grades and everything I had done, and pictures of the yearbook, where I was like in every other picture. Like the yearbook staff was like, we're on staff and you're in more pictures in this yearbook than we are. How does this happen? I was like, so I was really persistent, and I was able to enter college as an international student, and it was really expensive, but my family did everything possible to help with the first semester. And once I had my foot in the door, I was able to figure out ways to continue paying for school and college. And I felt really guilty, and I felt a sense of responsibility to ensure that my sisters also had the opportunity to go to school, and my friends. I was out as an undocumented person in high school because I was like, I'm not the only one, come on now. Like, I know how many of my friends are. And I also thought that if I told my story and I told other people, that perhaps somebody, an adult in the room, might know and might have an answer. But what happened when I did that is that my friends started coming to me and be like, hey, come here, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And they're like, can you pinky promise something? I'm like, oh God, here we go. And they would practically tell me, they too didn't have papers. And they would ask me and say, if you figure out a way to go to college, can you let me know? And my way was just so hard and difficult, and something that, not everyone was going to be able to do it. That's what kind of prompted me to ensure that, I was telling the students today, I was like, I didn't want to crack in the door, open the door. I wanted to kick down that door to ensure that other young people had the access to education. Yes?
Can you talk more about South Carolina as a block state and what Leo Collins' bill would do?
Yeah. So today, I joked around, but it's pretty true. So everywhere across the country, people are afraid to be the last, right? The state, the 50 states, the last on education, the last on X, Y, and Z, right? So South Carolina is not last, thank God, or who is last, as more restrictive states in the country for young people who don't have status. South Carolina actually has, there's only 2 states that have this, Georgia and South Carolina. Georgia's is worse because it bans people from being able to go to the state colleges. So if you are a student that has the means to pay for school and you want to go right to the University of Georgia, you cannot go because you are barred from going there. Does that ring a bell? 1960s, right? So South Carolina, it also has a law that bars from people being able to go to the colleges. So, but there is hope, and that's why South Carolina is not at the end, because there has been institutions that have been finding ways to allow undocumented students that have DACA to be able to start going to college. So that's a great thing. And then also you have somebody who has been championing a law that would allow for students that have DACA, only not all undocumented students, but those that have DACA, to be able to access in-state tuition and also some of the scholarship, merit-based scholarship programs.
Yeah, I was just going to add to one thing I learned just a week ago in my Capstone MSW class is that in the state of Georgia too, if police even think that you're undocumented, they can take you in, and if you are undocumented, they can put you in jail and try and return you.
Yes, that's correct. And many municipalities and districts also have that. There's a section of immigration law called 287G, what creates is agreements with ICE and those departments to keep immigrants. Even so, let's say there's a domestic dispute, and a lot of domestic dispute, what they do is they bring both in, right? It doesn't matter who was the aggressor, they bring both in to get the information. Well, if the person who's the victim doesn't have documentation, they get detained because they don't have documentation. And we've seen a lot of these cases of people, victims of domestic violence, who don't call the police because they're afraid of the police and the police detaining them and turning them over to immigration, customs, and enforcement. Yes?
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about negative feelings between, like, people losing their jobs and how that was in predominantly African-American community. I also noticed that in working class, predominantly white communities. And so it's a systemic issue. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you would propose fixing that.
Yes. So that's an amazing question. And a lot of the Midwest, that's actually the other issue, right? That you have a lot of people that are so anti-immigrant, and it's on that issue. And they're the ones usually chanting, build the wall. So it really comes down to the fact that you have people that want cheap labor and are willing to exploit that, right? And so you have people that are working in the fields, and that the Trump administration, for example, I spoke and shared with Newsweek last week that when we met with Trump, he told us, right, as we were talking about undocumented workers and how important they were to the economy, and he said, "Oh yeah, I know." He's like, "Who do you think keeps my golf courses so beautiful? They're the best, most beautiful golf courses, the greenest golf courses. Who do you think keeps them like that?" And I was like, is he just saying that he has undocumented people working for him? And exactly is what he was saying, right? So I think, regulating that, it's going to be really key and important. And the thing is that, as a country, we don't like to regulate things, right? We like the free economy. We like some of that stuff. But at the same time, right, if you do not have a system that ensures that people are getting paid a living wage, that people are getting the benefits that they have, that they need, that they deserve, right? Then that's where the system corrupts, and where you have businesses that at the end of the day, they don't care about the employees, they care about the bottom line, right? And they care about making sure that they make and bank the most amount of money for themselves. So I think realizing that at the end of the day, that's one of the root of the evils, right, that we're seeing, and that this is very controversial, but I actually do think that even though it's the system is flawed, but I think that the day that we have a system where in the United States you cannot hire anyone that is not documented, that you have a way to do that, that's when that day it's going to end, because unless you're hiring nannies, right, or people that are getting paid cash, people won't be able to exploit the system. People are going to have to be legalized, right? And so every immigration legalization, there's been advocates that are against what they call the E-Verify system. Because one, the E-Verify system still needs, the technology is kind of bad, but also because it's going to displace a lot of immigrants, right, who want to work here. But I'm like, no, let's create a fair system where if there's an immigrant that wants to come to this country and wants to have a job and there's a job available for them, that they can apply for that and they can apply for a legal status. And I'm not talking about temporary status, right? Because that's the other thing. We're like, well, we're just going to create a temporary worker system where we just bring people to work. Well, people should have rights that if they want to come and work here and they start building roots, that they have an opportunity to stay here, right? Nobody should be dictating, where you need to live or not, right? Which is the other problem that we also have. Yes, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to know more about your story when you were saying about the family. I wanted to know how you met them, who your parents thought about you leaving, and where they are today, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know where this, and I think about them all the time, especially when I'm in the Carolinas. I'm like, oh, it's kind of like the PTSD feeling. So I met them at a baby shower, and I was sitting next to the daughter, and I started playing with the daughter. So I'm an educator, that's what I went to school for. And the mom was just so amazed because the daughter was talking to me and I was playing with her, we were coloring and I was doing things, and she said, my daughter doesn't go with anyone, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm going to school to be a special education teacher. At that time I was actually so my dream was to be a musical therapist, and so I played the viola, and I was in college doing music education too. And so I said, well, maybe we can use a form of therapy, like music therapy, but I can come and teach her how to play the violin. And she said, oh, that would be great. So I started working with that family that way. They had a son who was autistic, and I also had worked with autistic people, so I kind of knew. And so I started teaching all the children, one to play the violin, the other one to play the viola, and the other one to play the cello. So I started spending a lot of time with the family because they had 3 kids, and that became kind of my side job, tutoring and helping with the kids. And so I had been working with the family for several months before this was offered to me, and they said, we really love you and we want to help you, and whatever it is that we can do. And they were like, my children have never taken to somebody the way they've taken to you. They went as far as saying, we'll buy you a car so that you can go to school and then come pick them up from school. And I was like, this would be amazing, right? And on top of the fact, this was a very, very rich family in Miami, and I thought, they'll help me out, and with the money that I'm making here, especially if I start doing more hours, I can also help support myself. So that's how that happened. And after the whole thing happened, I cut ticed completely with the family, and I was really afraid. I was really scared because they were in North Carolina. The brother was a state representative, and they knew that we didn't have papers. And I thought, anytime they can call immigration on us if I do anything, if I say anything, if I tell anyone what had happened to us. So yeah, I cut ties, and I really haven't heard from them or about them. Okay. Any other question? Can be any questions, really. So I'm going to share with you this story, maybe 2 stories. So I think it was in Georgia, or I can't remember where, but so on the trail we got to meet so many incredible people, and we would stop everywhere at little gas stations and places to talk to people. The whole idea was to share a story, because we believed that it wasn't that people were, like anti-immigrants, just didn't know. And as soon as they got to meet us and hear our stories, we knew that people were gonna at least start questioning, right? We wanted to plant seeds along the way. So we were at a gas station, and there was this woman who had just, come out, and we started talking to her, and I remember her going like, and we're like, what's going on? She's like, they lied to me. They lied to me. Everything I've been hearing on Fox News is wrong. They lied to me. And we're like, and then she opened up her wallet, and she looked at it, and there was $2. And she looked at it, she looked at us, and she takes out $1, and she goes, here, I want to help you out. And she's like, I wish I had more money, but this is all I have. And I remember like this woman, right? Like, and I'm gonna carry her in my heart forever. And I just thought, my God, right? Like, if we can just replicate this and talk to as many people, like, people get it at the end of the day. The other story, which I shared with Ben and other folks last night, and this one actually is like, I think, my favorite moment of the trail. So we were in South Carolina, and we had just finished talking at, what's the college, the all-women's college?
Oh, Columbia College.
Columbia College. So we had just finished, we were about to go to speak at Columbia College, and we were, around there was like a pizzeria place, and it was a hip place, and they were like, you have to go here. We're like, okay, we'll go. And on the trail, we had a rule. And one of the rules was, no matter how violent people are towards us, right, we will not engage. So we studied the civil rights movement, we talked to civil rights leaders before doing the walk, and that was one of the key principles that they had. Right? So you see a lot of the times in the videos, right, when the lunch counter sit-ins, right, they were being pulled and they didn't do anything, they just come back up and sat in, right? So we knew that that's the approach that we were gonna take. And the other rule that we had, that the four of us made a pact, right, that we were never gonna leave one behind, that we would always go in pairs. Somehow these boys decided to leave me behind. And I was so angry and I was scared, and I'm trying to find my way to the university. And all of a sudden I received a text saying, I think today is gonna be it. I think, we're gonna get, hit, or something's gonna happen, like some sort of violent thing is gonna happen. And I was just freaking out because I was left by myself and I'm getting this text. But as I walk into this room, I could feel the tension. And there was this man who was just so angry. And he was just talking to us and screaming at us and telling us, all these things about immigrants and how immigrants abuse the welfare system, and immigrants are the reason why the country's not doing well. And we're just like, wow. So, but again, in nonviolent fashion, we let him say his piece, and we sat down, and throughout the whole entire conversation, like, he would interrupt and say things, and we would acknowledge him and say, well, that's not necessarily true, and we would spit out facts and continue the thing until somebody was like, hey, listen, we didn't come to hear you out, please, stop, right? And so you can see he was angry, he was red. But towards the end of our lecture, he finally rose his hand, and we're like, oh, okay. So we say, yes, go ahead. And he says, look, I just want to apologize for everything I said before. Please throw everything I said out that window. And I remember we were sitting at a long table with like about 20 people, and there was a window behind me. And so I approached him afterwards, and he shared with me the fact that his wife had cancer, and she needed a transplant. I can't remember what type of transplant she needed. But he made $100 over, right, the limit, right, for him to get the assistance that she needed to get the medical help that she needed. And he shared with me how they were high school sweethearts and how he loved his wife, and he was seeing, his wife wither away. And, you know, I was crying, he was crying, and like we're hugging, and I was telling him, you know, I'm so sorry, like I wish I could do something, you know, to take this pain away. I wish I could do something to help your wife. And he was in so much pain, right? And back to your question, right? People, you know, are in so much pain when people lose their jobs, when people can't find jobs, when people, you know, are hurting, right? When the country hurts, like they're not able to, they see what's in front of them, right? And a lot of times what's in front of us is, you know, our fellow human beings, and we start playing the blame game, and we start pinpointing and, you know, pointing fingers. And, you know, that made me realize, right, how much pain people are in and how they need to find scapegoats, and they need to find others to put their pain on. And it was unfortunate, right, but I think it was great that we were able to dispel some of his myth. But I feel like that's my favorite moment of the trail, because we weren't aggressive with him. We weren't putting out the same energy he was putting towards us, right? We were kind to him. And through that kindness, you know, we were able to break down a barrier and demystify, right, those lies that he had to believe, right, that he put in himself. Like, I used to work at the border, and I would see all these immigrants come, and they have children, and they use them in our hospitals, and I was like, what? Like, how? Like, that doesn't happen, right? Like, you know, people don't have those kind of access. They can't get, you know, welfare checks and stuff like that. That's not true. And those systems are there, put in place for a reason to. And I wish they were there to help your wife, right? There's some flaw in that system for your wife. So yeah, I think there's a lot of tension in this, and the reason, right, why we can't move past finding solutions on immigration is because we want to be right. We want to be the ones that are right, and are not willing to listen, and are not willing to really try to get to the core of the issue. Yes.
Sort of bouncing off on that and going from the context that you gave us when you started with the history of immigration policy in the U.S., what do you hope comes next? Can you give us a vision for, like, what is our hope for what comes next? What's the next piece of legislation or the next step that you would hope for?
So I don't believe that legislations fix anything. I think they just temporarily do it. I think that the only time we're going to be able to move past all this is once the conscience of the country, right? Once people understand the immigration, right? The topic of it, and once they see it and realize that it's about people, it's about human beings, that immigration is going to continue to happen. And like I started with the 2013, right, legislation that passed, and I was for it. I fought for it. I testified in Congress for it. But my family, right, when it came down to it, would have never been able to apply for it. You know, maybe in the future, other families, right? But at the end of the day is that we think about immigration as a zero-sum game, that one legislation is going to solve it, and that's not true. And I think that once we come to realize that, I think, you know, and as a country, we change not just the narrative, not just the paradigm, but we really get to understand it. I think that's when we're going to start creating policies and laws that are reflective of it. But in order for the country to have that, you know, change of heart, it's going to be a lot of work. And you know, I see it kind of happening a little bit, but at the same time, you see, for example, DACA polls at 83, 85%, right? There's no issue in the country that polls that high, that people are for it. Yet at the end of the day, right, it can never pass Congress. It can never, you know, when they were discussing it, we had a shutdown, you know, for 35 days over the issue, and nothing got resolved. So it's one of those things where I think at the end of the day, it's just more, it's going to take a lot for the country as a whole, right? And I think it also has to do with the fact that we haven't resolved other issues, right? We have a huge right now problem with discrimination, right, in the country. The 1965 laws didn't fix that, right? There still is a pyramid or a classism. There's still all these different things that it's, you know, we can chew gum and walk at the same time, but it's just so heavy, right, what we carry as a country, that I think immigration is just another like issue that adds on to, right, that, and that we're gonna have to work at it. Like, this is gonna be a lifetime issue for me, for my children and their children, unfortunately. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about your framing for social change and what you think the most important process, or what most important part of the process for social change is?
So, that's a very deep question. Thank you for that. I think, unfortunately, right, I was at the Aspen Institute and I was talking, you know, about my story and talking to people, and somebody was telling me, like, why does it always have to be on us, right? Why does the burden have to be on the people who are affected by the issue to try to solve it? You know, why can't we get advocates and allies to, you know, take the flag for us? But I think at the end of the day, right, like, it's really hard for, and this is why I started with, you know, how many of you are from Columbia, South Carolina? How many are from South Carolina? How many are from other states? Because I wanted every single one of the people in this room to understand and know that they too moved. That my family moving from Ecuador to here is no different than, you know, the family moving from Michigan, right? Which I hear there's a lot of you folks from here, from Michigan, to South Carolina, right? And so, but it really is being able to connect at the human level. I think that that's where the social change will start, right? And it's hard, right? Because today, as I was talking to a group of high school students, one of the students came up to me and said, "I'm undocumented, and I want to go to school, but I'm shy, and I can't, like, because I was telling him, you know, go and do this, and you got to do this, and you just got to tell your story and talk to people." And he was like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that, right? So it's not necessarily for everyone to be, you know, a loud advocate and activist, but I think that it's really key and important that at any juncture, at any time, there's always a person, at least one person that is affected by the issue that is there, right, to guide and be a voice, right? It's really key and important because it's easy to talk about others and try to solve, but not having that person in the room, right, that has the experience that can tell you, right, we're gonna be making little mistakes, I think, along the way. Any other questions? I'll stick around too if you have some questions that you feel like, I feel a little afraid of asking. Yes?
I have a question. Do you think if the public would be better informed about the facts behind immigration, like they don't have access to social security and they don't have access to health insurance, do you think that would help kind of changing this?
It helps a little. I think this is the ultimate question that all advocates ask themselves, right? Like, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg kind of question. I think you need data. You need some good information, but you also need stories, and you need to use both, right, to be able to do that. It's an important balance because one of the things that I felt worked when we were talking to that man in Columbia College was spitting out data, and we were like, "Where do you get your data? So what do you mean? How many people?" And I was like, well, and they would just get all flustered, and we're like, "Do you know that you need to X, Y, and Z?" And you know, I've heard people, for example, with the insurance, I'm like, the Obama administration, without telling anyone, carved out documented people from the ACA from being able to apply for insurance. They did that, and I was like, that makes no sense. You want your people to, you know, go into the exchange and get insurance so that they're paying into it for the older generation, right? Yes, I do think it's really key and important, and but I feel like just facts also don't work because, you know, when you start talking about numbers and stuff, then you miss the point, right, of the human and the dignity, right, of people. Any other question? Again, if you have any question that, the last thing I wanted to, sorry. It's an example. So this is the one that I was thinking about. I was like, oh, if I get asked this question. So I had a few examples ready to go. So the representative, Collins, 3404, really important. Please support that legislation. It's not perfect, but it's a step forward. And like I said, there's no perfect legislation and no policy is ever going to fix everything. But what he is getting is, well, if you allow these students, right, to go into our colleges, they're going to take the seat away from my child. That is wrong. You know? Our citizens, we should put our citizens first, right? So the Dream.us has, like I said, 4,000 scholarships out there, and there's about 3,400 students currently in school right now. There's a university in Illinois called Dominican University, and they went from being 19 to number, I think 11 in the U.S. Something Midwest, right? Like for colleges and universities. And the president says the reason why, right, we went so high is because of your students, right? Your students are fantastic. The retention, the persistence, we have 100% persistence rate. They're graduating on time. Their graduation rate is helping us that, right? So when I've heard that, I laugh because I remember being the student that would try to lobby other students to join the class and sign up for a class so that the class could be made available. So there was actually not a lot of people taking certain courses, and the more people that you actually have, right, at institutions, right, is good for the institution. It's more generating more dollars, it's generating, so that same concept works for the country, right? Less people doesn't necessarily mean better economies. That just doesn't work like that, right? And the fact is that the people that are here, they're not living out of thin air. They're not, you know, they're like, they don't pay taxes. I'm like, look, when I'm in Miami and I'm buying a pair of shoes, I don't say, don't tax me because I'm undocumented. I pay taxes on those. And when I have to pay my house, right, and the big tax bill comes in on my house, I say, don't give me those because I am undocumented, right? I'm paying taxes too. And so I think it's really important, like, for people to recognize that, like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Some of these things that people are saying, right? So think about that classroom, right? We want more people in the classroom. We want to have, the more people you have, especially if you're like in a lecture, right? The more diversity of voices you have, right? The more experience that you can have and say. So when you hear somebody talk bad about it, you know, share with them the analogy of the classroom, especially the students that are in this room, right? You want to have more students in your school so that you can have, right, the resources, the funding, right, to have that professor to do that class.
Please join me again in thanking Gaby and to thank you for all of you for coming out tonight. I also want to recognize Dean Geller and Dr. Pittner for their support and for helping to make tonight possible. We've really appreciated all of the great comments and questions that you have. There are also refreshments in the side of the room over here. And Gaby has volunteered to take more questions one-on-one if people had things that they're too shy to say in front of the whole group. So join me again in thanking Gaby.